Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be entitled Hollywood Murder, Mayhem, and Mendacity. And what I would refer to as the 3 M's of Hollywood. Murder, Mayhem, Mendacity. Now, when I say the word Hollywood, what I really mean is the CIA or clandestine services. Clandestine services would include British intelligence, Israeli Mossad, KGB, the Chinese secret police, the Secret Service, the FBI, the let's see, what else can I say? Contractors, military contractors. I won't mention names, but virtually the entire Fortune 500 companies would fall into the role of clandestine service subcontractor. And then there would be contractors subcontracted within the contractors. So I'm talking about over 10,000 business entities that are involved in the clandestine services. And I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people in the United States that you think are your neighbors and fellow citizens. But they work for clandestine services. When I say Hollywood, I mean every industry in America and the world. Because there is no America. There is only the Wizard of Oz, the mighty Wizard of Oz, the authority figure, which is a financial system of money. And remember the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. That's the golden rule. It's not do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not the golden rule, okay? All right, so the gold portrayed in The Wizard of Oz was the yellow brick road. And by the way, that film is being shown now that we're moving into the holiday seasons and Christmas is approaching. So you have your chance to see a 16-year-old Judy Garland with her magnificent co-stars, the Cowardly Lion, the brainless Scarecrow, and of course the soulless Tin Man, as they go on a quest to find the Wizard of Oz and get their requests granted, their wishes granted. So before I get into some examples to illustrate the point of Hollywood murder, mayhem, and mendacity, I want to revisit Ronald Reagan, because to me, he really does embody the soul of Hollywood, as a guy who I think had the best intentions and got swallowed up into the magic castle of what is the art of illusions, deceptions, and being compromised. Because at no time do I think Ronald Reagan was in charge of his life once he signed a contract within the Hollywood system. Frank Sinatra, Jimmy Stewart, Johnny Carson, Milton Berle, Elvis Presley, John Lennon, Paul McCartney. Exact same story as Elvis Presley. There isn't a centimeter's worth of difference. There's not a centimeter's worth of difference between Elvis Presley and Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and Paul McCartney and John Lennon and Neil Young. And who else can I throw in there? Cass Elliot, Natalie Wood, Marilyn Monroe, Goodbye Norma Jean, Elton John, right? Elton John, Michael Jackson. How have things worked out for the people that resided at 722 North Elm Drive in Beverly Hills? Well, it didn't work out too well for Michael Jackson, did it? It didn't work out too well for Jose Menendez, did it? It didn't work out that particularly spectacularly for Elton John. He had to move up to the Truesdale estates up near where Elvis Presley lived to get away from the Svengali hypnosis seance that went on there in that zip code of 90210, right? 90210 Beverly Hills. Anyway, to revisit Ronald Reagan, let's remember that he he started out of modest means in the state of Illinois. And when World War II came along, Ronald Reagan was 31 years old. So he's a little older than your typical soldier. And he volunteered for the Army Reserves, where he was sent to San Francisco, CIA, San Francisco by the Bay. He was stationed at Fort Mason, which is near the marina, which is in a very nice part of San Francisco. And it's in relatively close proximity to the Presidio Army Base, which of course is home to all kinds of nefarious activities, which is bordered by the University of San Francisco, Jesuit University, the Lone Mountain Campus for Women, Jesuits, the St. Ignatius High School, the St. Ignatius Catholic Parish, and St. Agnes Parochial Elementary School is all there, as well as where the Pelosi family would eventually reside in Presidio Heights, where Sharon Tate's father would live in officer housing next door to Presidio Heights, in close proximity where Ronald Reagan was stationed at Fort Mason before that. And also this is where the Sacred Heart Convent Parochial School Mansion is located at 2222 Broadway in Pacific Heights, which is not too far from Presidio Heights, but it has a better view of the Golden Gate Bridge and Tiburon, Belvedere, and Angel Island, and of course Alcatraz. So Ronald Reagan would be able to see Alcatraz from Fort Mason, and Nancy and Paul Pelosi can see Alcatraz from their real home on Pacific Avenue, not the fake home that's at 2640 Broadway. There's no view of the Golden Gate Bridge or of Belvedere, Tiburon, Alcatraz, where the infamous hammer attack that never happened, happened. You haven't heard a peep about that, have you? How many people do you know that are 82 years old, can nearly get killed in a 911 Porsche Carrera car wreck, nearly die in a car crash, then a couple of months later get conked in the head, at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2:30 in the morning by a hammer, be transported to the acute care hospital that's the furthest away from your neighborhood. You've got a emergency acute care hospital 5 blocks from where the attack happens, but instead you go 25 minutes away to San Francisco General Zuckerberg Hospital, and you only spend a week in jail, a week in the hospital, and then we don't hear a peep about how's your head? Do you have a headache? Or how come you're not dead? How come you're not in a coma? I mean, most young people, if you conked them in the head with a ball-peen hammer or a sledgehammer, they'd be dead, or they certainly would be out of it, right? But Paul Pelosi, he seems okay. I mean, no news is good news, right? Well, anyway, that's the neighborhood where, Ronald Reagan was initially sent up. He wasn't there for very long, and he volunteered to, get into the Hollywood business. This is where Ronald Reagan really was rolled into Hollywood, is that he volunteered to go do propaganda films in Culver City. So that required he went to the AAF acronym, remember? Everything to do with banking, everything to do with military, everything to do with CIA, OSS, right, is acronym. It's alphabet soup. It's always alphabet soup, so that the fewest number of people know what you're talking about. That's part of the hiding in plain view. AAF stands for Army Air Forces, so it's Airborne Army. This is what William Colby volunteered for, to be a paratrooper for Army Airborne in Europe. But they sent him up with British intelligence, sent him to Scotland, and taught him survival training, taught him how to use a bayonet. They didn't have the M7 bayonet in 1942. This weapon was still in development, but they did have daggers and they did have bayonets. They just didn't have the My Lai massacre, Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger banker bayonet. This was more sophisticated. So Ronald Reagan ends up in Culver City, where he immediately is promoted to captain, to the rank of captain, and he does some really good work in the war propaganda film business. This is where Sharon Tate signed her 7-year contract with MGM and CBS, Columbia Pictures and CBS Television, through Filmways, which is the broker, who has an office in MGM Studios. So when I say that she signed a contract with Filmways, let me make myself very clear. Sharon Tate signed a contract with MGM, okay? She signed it in their office building, which is about 1 mile away from where Dorothy Stratton was later murdered in a ritual killing in Culver City. This is a couple of miles away from where the infamous Anne Heche fiery car crash this year that never happened was presented to us, on the west side of the San Diego freeway. Ronald Reagan was working on the east side of the freeway. Not that far. I mean, you could walk from where Ronald Reagan worked and where Sharon Tate signed her contract. You could walk from there to where the fake car crash that never happened. There was no car crash of any kind, people. It wasn't that Anne Heche didn't drive the car. Nobody drove the car. I mean, I guess somebody did drive a little Mini Cooper car onto the front lawn there. You have to make a corner because there's a big hedgerow that blocks the line into the living room, which, by the way, is 37 inches above the lawn. So you'd have to be Harry Houdini to get into that house. You couldn't be a Formula One race car driver. You'd need to be like an illusionist to get into that home, which is going to have a structured felony arson fire, right? So those are things that are deceptions and fraud and part of the Hollywood mayhem. But Ronald Reagan integrated into Culver City, that zip code, in doing war propaganda films, which were probably less than 100% honest and truthful, don't you think? He was then sent to New York City because he was so great as terms of his presentation and salesmanship. And there in New York City, he was pitching war bonds, trying to get Americans who had saved money to, stoke the war effort allegedly, as if there's a special checking account for the war. It's all commingled, right? Medicare money, war money, it all goes into the same checking account. But anyway, there's Ronald Reagan, and he's pitching war bonds on behalf of Wall Street, really. Because let's be honest, the federal government does not handle its own finances. It's done by the central authority, the Wizard of Oz, the banks. The banks control the financing. The banks control the budget. The banks control Ronald Reagan. That's who controls Ronald Reagan. That's who controls Hollywood. That's what decides which films are green-lighted and which films are discarded, ignored, or used as spare parts. You are aware that Hollywood is notorious for stealing ideas, stealing songs, stealing lyrics, stealing other people's Hollywood film concepts. And then, like the movie The Matrix, I understand that was pirated from the original writer, who never got paid a single dime on The Matrix, which is basically a documentary about, our world, the world of simulation. Ronald Reagan then went on to, as a captain in the Army, was discharged in 1943. And he was made a captain in 1943, went up to New York in 1944, pitched the war bonds, and then the war ended in 1945, and then, Ronald Reagan was discharged. And he immediately became the president of the Screen Actors Guild in Hollywood, I think on the strength of his presentations there in terms of believability on camera. Ronald Reagan was successful. And he also then did some, cowboy films, Western films up there at the George Spahn Ranch. And he made friends with the Wrangler, Donald Jerome Shorty Shea, I think they called him. He was 6'6", so they called him Shorty. And Ronald Reagan was weaved into, the Sharon Tate murders, even though I don't believe he had anything to do with it. But he was implicated in terms of perhaps he provided the murder weapon, the bunt-line 22 caliber pistol, when M16 rifles were used in the murder. So, there were 22 caliber pistol bullets that were dug out of 3 victims. There were 7 bullets found, no shell casings. And then the media implied that perhaps was from Ronald Reagan's pistol. Ronald Reagan was the fake governor of California, if you remember, in August 1969, Ronald Reagan was pretending to be the governor of California. I personally met Ronald Reagan, and I was impressed and charmed by him in 1980, and just after he won the presidential race in December 1980, but before he had taken the oath of office, which he took on January 20th, 1981. Anyway, Ronald Reagan was the Screen Actors Guild's president twice, and from 1947 until 1952, and then again in 1959 to 1960. So a grand total of about 6 years, Ronald Reagan was the Screen Actors Guild president, which is a cult. And you should know that Ronald Reagan was an informant for the FBI. They gave him a code name T10. Ronald Reagan was T10, and he was given that informant code around the time that he first took the office of Screen Actors Guild president in 1947. So Ronald Reagan was an informant for the clandestine services effective 1947, and he knew everybody in Hollywood, and I mean he knew everybody in Hollywood, and he's a paid informant. Key word here, paid informant. And he's also a holder of a Screen Actors Guild card. So this falls within the category that John Kennedy later told us: infiltration, not invasion; guerrillas by night, not armies by day, right? Through intimidation, not free choice. Are these concepts coming together? You got the president of the Screen Actors Guild here. He's a paid informant for the FBI. He's the president of the Screen Actors Guild. He's been chosen by the Hollywood elite. He signs a contract with General Electric to be their spokesman beginning in 1954. Ronald Reagan is a Democrat, people. He's a Democrat. And he is not a Republican. He is a Democrat. Now, I don't want to get into politics because I think politics is sort of the art of illusion and diversion and distraction. However, I understand that people do like, certain music and they despise other types of music. And I think that our friends in the clandestine services know that better than most. That's why they give you, choices. They said Coke or Pepsi, Democrat or Republican, smoking or non-smoking. Did you want to sit in the smoking section or the non-smoking? Did you want a smoking room or a non-smoking room? I think everybody wants a non-smoking room, including the smokers, because I've been given non-smoking rooms and I can smell tobacco. So I think that non-smokers get duped sometimes. Anyway, then we had other choices that you have in our democracy. Our fake democracy, the one that runs on maritime law, that you have aisle or window, right? Paper or plastic. Those are your choices in our totalitarian admiralty law. Do as I say. We're all on a ship. The captain is the authority. He's the Wizard of Oz. We follow orders or people die. That's our system. Coke or Pepsi, aisle or window, paper or plastic, smoking or non-smoking. I think that's it. I think that is it. The rest of the decisions will be made by the highest authority. A committee of circle of trust of a bunch of perverted men who fly around with Alan Dershowitz and Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates and whatever clone, phony, fake billionaire they want to roll out. Because I'm telling you right now, the scions make the rules, not the fake billionaires. Okay? The fake billionaires are not in charge. If you see someone on television like Ron DeSantis or Gavin Newsom, who are both fake governors of states that they don't control. I mean, Ron DeSantis plays the kind of music that I like. I don't trust him at all. Yale University, Harvard Law, Office of Naval Intelligence, prisoner dilemma game training in Guantanamo Bay, Navy SEAL training, and he's going to represent the interests of Florida. Are you crazy? I mean, that's like saying Alan Dulles is going to handle your bank account. Do you trust the CIA director with handling your money? Do you trust Ron DeSantis with handling your liberty and freedom? If you don't take responsibility, believe me, he's not. He's following orders. He follows admiralty law. Ron DeSantis knows we follow orders or people die. And Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom, sponsored by the Gordon Getty and Nancy Pelosi and her family, they know very well. Dianne Feinstein, Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, they know very well we follow orders or people die. Do you want me to mention some names? George Moscone, Harvey Milk. Didn't they have their heads blown off in City Hall, where Nancy Pelosi just presided over a wedding of a granddaughter of the Gordon Getty family, who's related, through Paul Pelosi's brother's ex-wife, Barbara? Yeah, it's a cult. It's a cult. And Ronald Reagan was in this cult too. It's called the Screen Actors Guild. It's called the Hollywood Cult. Ronald Reagan, once he signed his contract with General Electric, who's a major international seller. Remember, GE brings good things to life, right? And this is when Disneyland was open. 1955, I believe it was July 1955, grand opening for Disneyland, which was patterned after the World's Fair, the World's Exhibition. The World's Exhibition. So don't think that, Walt Disney was that brilliant. He's just copying and pasting an existing model that existed before, he created it. Just take the World's Fair and you just make it open 7 days a week in an orange grove in Orange County in Anaheim. And do you know that Disneyland has a jail? They have a jail. My cousin was put into Disneyland jail. It's off Ball Road, the north part of the property, near the Dumbo exhibit. They have a jail there, underground. That's why you can't see it. They have a jail at Disneyland. That's right. It's set up like a military base. But it's to restructure the minds of children using corporate exhibitors. And you know the names of those corporate exhibitors, and General Electric is one of them. And so naturally, once Ronald Reagan signed his contract with General Electric, he's going to be a Masters of Ceremony to present to the children and their parents the goings-on at beautiful Magic Kingdom. Magic Kingdom, right? Where we capture your imagination, and therefore we can capture you through the magic, use of deceptions and illusion, like the Magic Castle on Franklin Avenue in Hollywood, across the street from the Dolby Theater, where Will Smith bitch slaps Chris Rock, and everybody believes it, even though he probably missed him by, at least 18 inches. All right, so anyway, Ronald Reagan partners with Art Linklater, and they are co-masters of ceremonies in July 1955 for the grand opening of Disneyland, which features Fess Parker, who was known as Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone as a Disney actor. I personally met Fess Parker numerous times in Santa Barbara at his hotel, which I believe now is part of the Hilton family. It was a Sheraton hotel for a while. Now it's with the Hilton family. Anyway, Fess Parker rode a horse down Main Street as Art Linklater and Ronald Reagan, who were just 1 year apart in age. They presided over Master of Ceremony duties there. And they were in their mid-40s, like 44, age 44 for Art Linklater, and Ronald Reagan, I believe, is 1 year older than Art Linklater. So let's say he's 45, Art Linklater 44. And there they are holding court with Walt Disney and Fess Parker. Somebody's got to pick up the poop, right? So you got to have some poop bags out there in Disneyland, because everything is supposed to be pristinely clean there. But a pony did ride down the street at Disneyland. I'm just letting you know. In 1955, July. And Ronald Reagan was the man. But what I want to segue over to the Hollywood murder, mayhem, and mendacity is that it's tortured souls, people. Once you sign a contract with Hollywood through your agency agreement, and once you find work, you get a Screen Actors Guild card. Once those fees are collected and you sign a contract to do work on film, the music industry, or television, or some performance art, let's say a contract in Las Vegas where you appear on stage like Elvis Presley did, at the Hilton Hotel for Conrad Hilton. Elvis had to sign a contract to appear twice a year for 2 10-week stays. That's 20 weeks a year. That's 133 shows times 2. That's 266 shows a year forever, because as long as Colonel Parker owed Conrad Hilton his phony baloney gambling debt, Elvis wasn't going to leave the building, so to speak. That's signing a contract with the devil, whether you sneak in through the back door using a degenerate gambling manager, or whether you just intimidate the heck out of the talent, like they did with Frank Sinatra. Here's a tormented soul, right? Everybody that Frank Sinatra came in contact with got murdered. I mean, it's a long list of people that Frank Sinatra was close to that got done away with. And that's also true with Judy Garland, and that's true with Cass Elliot, and that is certainly true with Art Linkletter, and that's true with William Holden, who, by the way, was the best man at Ronald Reagan's second marriage to the woman known as Nancy Davis, not her real name. I think her name is Janice. Anyway, Ronald Reagan was a tormented soul. He was compromised fully. And so was Art Linkletter, who had his son-in-law murdered at age 33, the month before Sharon Tate was murdered. Then he had his friend Sharon Tate was murdered, and her baby daddy, Tom Coomer, was murdered, who knows Art Linkletter and who worked with Art Linkletter's son, Robert, in the Batman television series at CBS, who played young Joker, and Jay Sebring appeared in Batman episodes. Jay Sebring, a.k.a. Tom Coomer, got murdered by the M7 bayonet. And then 2 months after the Sharon Tate murder that Art Linkletter knew, those are three people he knew. He knew his son-in-law, John Zweier. He knew Sharon Tate. He knew Jay Sebring. He certainly knows his 20-year-old daughter, Diane Linkletter. She gets thrown off the 6th-floor apartment, her apartment, on North Horn Avenue in West Hollywood, face planting into the sidewalk where she dies at age 20. Baking cookies on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. And then they call it a suicide. Really? You know a lot of 20-year-old girls baking cookies that dive off of a balcony? And there's a 27-year-old man in her kitchen by the name of Ed Durston. And I don't think the police believed his story. He said, oh, he tried to save her, but she just got away from him. Yeah, right, sure. And he lives across the street. He lives across the street at 1211 North Horn. And then so they go to the funeral services, which are on Wednesday. She dies on Saturday morning, and they have the funeral on Wednesday. And Art Linkletter and his wife, they're too distraught to go. They go to Lake Tahoe, but they pay for the memorial services. And Ed Durston goes to those services along with his apartment neighbor across the street at 1211. No, it's 1121, 1121 North Horn, 1121 across the street. So Connie Monty, who's age 29 years old, no, she's 31 years old. I think she's 31, and Ed Durston's 27. They go to the memorial services for the 20-year-old Diane Linkletter, and they come back, Wednesday midday, and somehow Connie ends up taking barbiturates, and she dies in her bedroom, discovered by her husband later that day. What do you think the mathematical probability is that you got two dead women, within 100 yards of each other, and you're baking cookies with the first one, and then you're the next door neighbor of the second one, and you don't get arrested, and you don't get charged with any crimes? That's a CIA apartment building, by the way, people. There's at least a dozen people that are involved with clandestine services in Hollywood that live in that building. I mean, there's nobody except CIA people in that building. But I think Connie Monty maybe was putting two and two together, and somebody had to put her down. And that explains why Ed Durston didn't get arrested, because he's working for the clandestine services. His name appears in Abigail Folger's book. All right, so stay with me, because we have a lot of tormented souls here who die similarly. And we're going to start with, going to hit the pause button on Ronald Reagan. We'll come back to him later. But Jean Harlow, okay, she gets married at age 21 to an age 42-year-old man a Jewish man by the name of Paul Byrne, not his real name. His real name is Paul Levy, but they changed his Levy to Byrne, B-E-R-N. So Paul Byrne is 42 years old, and his new bride, Jean Harlow, is 21. And they move into the J. Sebring home, 9820 Easton Drive. It's walking distance to where Sharon Tate gets killed. It's about a mile, but as the crow flies, it's a half a mile. Because you go down a hill, make a U-turn, go back up the hill, and then turn left on Bella, which they renamed Cielo. The Cielo off Cielo on Bella. Anyway, as the crow flies, it's not far. As you drive your vehicle, it's about a mile. Anyway, Paul Byrne is shot in the back of the head with a .38. And he leaves an unsigned suicide note. That's what I like to do. I like to leave my notes unsigned. Do I look like a guy that writes notes that I don't sign my name? Anyway, he's murder-suicided on September 5th, 1932. And a couple of years later, Jean Harlow's she's only 21. So 5 years later, she's 26. And then she mysteriously dies of uremic poisoning, kidney failure. But it sounds like the introduction of some kind of toxic, like barbiturate poisoning. But anyway, Jean Harlow, murder-suicide, dies June 7th, 1937. The next starlet on my list is Marilyn Monroe. You might have heard of her. She's murder-suicided on August 5th, 1962, at age 36. The Thomas Noguchi is the examiner, and he rules it acute barbiturate poisoning. I'm calling those two similar deaths. Jean Harlow, and then, 25 years later, we got Marilyn Monroe. Then we have Judy Garland. Judy Garland murder-suicides on June 22nd, 1969 in central London. Perfect place for her to go because she was in a documentary called The Wizard of Oz, which is about central bank authority. It's about central bank digital currency. It's about listen and obey. We follow orders or people die. That's what The Wizard of Oz was about, with the flying monkeys and the Convent of the Sacred Heart, Wicked Witch of the East, Wicked Witch of the West, Evelyn and Evil. Evelyn and Evil. That's a banking documentary. The only thing missing in that film was the M7 bayonet because it hadn't been manufactured yet. Otherwise, I'm sure they would have exhibited it in The Wizard of Oz. All right. They did have armed guards in that film. It was rather intimidating. So Judy Garland is killed in central London, which is the center of banking authority on the planet Earth. And she dies, guess what? Of acute barbiturate poisoning, just like Marilyn Monroe did, and kind of sort of like Jean Harlow did. All right, so then we get out to Diane Linklater was just tossed out the window, so she wasn't killed of poisoning. They said she was on LSD. There was no drugs in her system, allegedly. But anyway, I'm not going to count Diane Linklater, although, perhaps she was on some kind of drugs. Natalie Wood, she's age 43, and she gets murder-suicided at November 29th, 1981, and she had alcohol in her body. She might have had some barbiturates in there. So that's kind of mysterious. In any case, Inger Stevens is murdered on April 30th, 1970, at age 35, and Thomas Noguchi is working in the ME office, and he rules that acute barbiturate poisoning. So we have Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, and Inger Stevens, all three definitely ruled acute barbiturate poisoning. But we have Jean Harlow that looks a lot like it too. And we have Natalie Wood that's a possibility. And then we have William Shatner's wife, Nerine Elizabeth Kidd, who's murdered exactly, and I mean exactly 30 years to the day from when Sharon Tate was murdered. Nerine Elizabeth Kidd Shatner, age 40, is drowned in William Shatner's swimming pool in Studio City on August 9th, 1999. Remember, Sharon Tate was murdered on August 9th, 1969, 30 years earlier. And, in Hollywood, they like to laugh in your face because they don't think you're smart enough to know that they celebrate 30-year anniversaries. But essentially, William Shatner's third wife, 28 years younger than him, was murdered when he went to have dinner with his daughter in Orange County, and he won't tell me what city, and he won't tell me which daughter. I can guess which daughter he was with. But the point is that he doesn't have a very good alibi, and his phone calls to his distraught wife, who he's in the process of divorcing. He has motive, means, and opportunity. William Shatner. Motive, means, opportunity. But anyway, he doesn't get charged with any homicide, so no harm, no foul. But Nerine Elizabeth Kidd is dead as a doornail in the swimming pool with alcohol and Valiums in her body. So that kind of sounds sort of like could be acute barbiturate poisoning. So if I stretch my list out, I've got Jean Harlow, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland, Natalie Wood, Inger Stevens, that's 5. And then I got Nerine Shatner, that's 6. So I got 6 women that could have been killed by toxic shock overdose. And this year, 2022, to that list of 6, I can add Lindsey Pearlman, who was found in her car with the radio running, parked outside of Runyon Canyon Park, in close proximity to the Magic Castle and the Dolby Center, the Dolby Theater, about 3/4 of a mile, about 1 kilometer away. She's in her car, parked on a steep hill just below the gate at Runyon Canyon Park, and she dies of what's called sodium nitrate toxicity, which sounds a lot like acute barbiturate poisoning. It took a really long time to get that description out of the medical exams office, so I'm calling that a made-up cause of death. Just like Erin Valente, it took every bit of 5 months. She died her body was found on October 12th, and they came out with the explanation in February 15th, whilst we were into the coronavirus rollout. So November, December, January, February, okay, 4 months. 120 days to tell you that Erin Valente died of a manic episode. That's like saying that you died of sudden death syndrome. There's no such thing as a manic episode. That's not a cause of death. Every single person whose heart stopped is dying of a manic episode, okay? So it's a cop-out. And I'm calling the Lindsey Pearlman, which was February 2022. I don't have the date in front of me, but anyway, it was February 18th. She was found dead February 18th, 2022 of some kind of a toxic shock problem. So that adds up to 7 women who were doped and dead in Hollywood. In the case of Marilyn Monroe, she was in Brentwood, very close to where O.J. Simpson's ex-wife, Nicole Brown, was, bayoneted, stabbed to death over on Bundy, next door to William Colby's son, Carl Colby. He's her neighbor, Carl Colby, CI director's son, was next door neighbors to Nicole Brown. Then she moved across the easement. So they're still in same distance, but instead of next door, she's across the driveway where their garages face each other, so that when they pull out of their garage, they got to wait for the other person to go first so they don't crash into each other. That's how close Carl Colby was to Nicole Brown. And their children played together. So you have a CI director's son, palsy-walsy, with the victim, who dies in an Operation Gladio style, knife attack by the sword. Gladio. All right. Anyway, so I got 7 women who died of what appears to be, some kind of toxic overdose. Then, with respect to some other similarities, we had, trying to go in chronological order, but I'm going to get this out of order. But Anthony Bourdain, remember him? The CIA works very closely with culinary artists like Julia Childs. She worked for the OSS CIA in her cooking show to roll out, false narratives or anchor bias on current events because she's a celebrity. Anthony Bourdain was garroted or choked out on June 8th, 2018. Thomas Albert Dekker, a very successful television and film actor, who've been in over 100 films in Hollywood. He was choked out in the exact same way on May 5th, 1968. JonBenet Ramsey, you might remember the little 6-year-old beauty queen. She was like a Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was, JonBenet Ramsey was Sharon Tate. They had the exact trajectory. It's just that Sharon Tate lived 20 years longer before she was murdered, right? So JonBenet Ramsey was choked out. We don't have the exact time. It was either Christmas evening or it was the day after Christmas. December 26th is the day after. So that her body was discovered December 26, 1996. And we have David Carradine was choked out in the same way that Anthony Bourdain was. He was in Bangkok, Thailand, which is a CIA city, for opium. And David Carradine murdered in an upscale hotel room. Robin Williams was choked out in the exact same way in his Tiburon Cay Cove off of Paradise Boulevard in Tiburon. Robin Williams murdered, suicided on August 11th, 2014. So to summarize, I got Robin Williams, I got David Carradine, I got JonBenet Ramsey, age 6. Her father works for CIA, Lockheed Martin. Thomas Albert Decker, he's murdered in 1968. Then I got Anthony Bourdain, murder-suicide in 2018. That's 5 men who died by garrote. 5. And all of them have relationships with CIA. 100%. All of them. They die exactly the same method. Just a coincidence, I guess. And after JonBenet Ramsey, JonBenet Ramsey was followed, she followed the death of William Colby, who was disappeared on April 27th, 1996. Disappeared for 9 days, then reappears like Harry Houdini on the beach. And 1 month later, Timothy Leary goes bye-bye at the Sharon Tate murder scene, down the hill. At 10106 Sunberg Drive, Timothy Leary goes to sleep and doesn't wake up on May 30th, 1996. 35 seconds away from where Abigail Folger's body was stabbed 28 times by the bayonet. Anyway, these are not coincidences. These are not coincidences. All the people I mentioned are associated with clandestine services, and they're all murdered in similar fashions. So you know that the CIA and the clandestine service are not that creative. They use the same methods over and over and over again. They use the same cover stories. Rinse and repeat is what MIT University has a belief system on that. Rinse and repeat. Why change it if it works? And that's how it was with Ronald Reagan, because after he took the oath of office to be president on January 20th, 1981, he just goes 2 months out and then he gets shot in his right rib cage by a pneumatic air gun, electronic pneumatic air gun, and they call it an assassination attempt by a CIA friend of George Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. John Hinckley, he's a friend of the family's, right, for the vice president. But he's not shot with a bullet, he's shot with a planchette. He's shot with a planchette. So it wasn't an intention to kill Ronald Reagan, it was to shake him up and scare him and to remind Ronald Reagan who's the boss. Because they know Ronald Reagan is charismatic and he won by a landslide over Jimmy Carter. But I'm going to read you something that the totally controlled Ronald Reagan delivered in a speech. He actually delivered this in a speech, and I have a lot of respect for him. This is sort of like something that you'd get from John Fitzgerald Kennedy, where he delivered that speech at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, where he said that we are opposed by a monolithic force. Okay, well, in 1961, when Ronald Reagan had already been a big shot at Disneyland and was good friends with Art Linkletter, and he was well into his General Electric contract as a Democratic candidate, but he was coming to the end of his GE contract, which I believe expired 1962. In 1961, Ronald Reagan Ronald Reagan delivered this speech. All right. All right. Remember, he was hired by General Electric in 1954 to host the General Electric Theater, and which was a weekly television dramatic series. But he also was sent packing and traveled the entire United States to give motivational speakers to the GE employees, which GE had 200,000 employees back in 1954, mainly on the strength of World War II. You remember World War II, right? Because GE was a war contractor. When Congress was proposing legislation for a socialized healthcare system, it would be later called Medicare, that was introduced in 1961. So Ronald Reagan was hired by the American Medical Association, which we used to all trust in, the AMA, and we don't trust them anymore. But anyway, Ronald Reagan created a recording for the American Medical Association that warned that such legislation would mean the end of freedom in America. This is interesting, people, because it applies to the here and now. Ronald Reagan said that if his listeners did not write letters to their congressman to prevent it, we will awake to find that we have socialism. If you don't do this, and if you don't do it in the next few days, you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children that it was once like in America when men were free. Other democratic initiatives he opposed in the 1960s included the food stamp program, raising the minimum wage, and the establishment of the Peace Corps. Ronald Reagan was opposed to the establishment of the Peace Corps, which I believe is a clandestine services spy operation, just like World Vision and other charitable so-called clandestine service volunteer organizations. Ronald Reagan also joined the National Rifle Association, known as the NRA, and he would become a lifetime member for the freedom to bear arms of the NRA. Anyway, I respect those things that Ronald Reagan was standing for, except that, the fact is that our economy is run by the banks. So the concept of a minimum wage is sort of superfluous. But I do believe in the freedom of the constitutions and the Bill of Rights, that you should have the right to own a weapon. And you see that's just being taken away. And because the Wizard of Oz wants to be an authority. But he's telling you that the Medicare program is going to cause the loss of your freedom. Boy, is that ever true. Can you trust a medical doctor today? All right. And I don't mean John Campbell, a fake doctor on YouTube. He has 2.5 million subscribers, and he has no medical licenses. He has no clinical experience. Okay? The guy he's a fraud. He has a PhD in English literature, and he has a nurse practitioner certificate that probably hasn't been renewed. He's not a doctor. There are no doctors on YouTube. Are you kidding me? They can't speak against Medicare. Ronald Reagan got it right. Medicare is socialized engineering, artificial intelligence healthcare delivery system. Their solutions to cancer are always the same: surgery, radiation, chemo. That's it. Their solutions to people who have inflammation in their heart because maybe they're allergic to some kind of injection is ibuprofen, corticosteroids, and then installing stents, which Medicare will reimburse. Is that going to solve your problem? No. No, it's not. Is that what Medicare pays for? You betcha. So we have a system that's architected in such a way that a financial coding person can decide your healthcare treatments, not a medical doctor. You can see what's happening. Medical doctors are going to go the way of the dodo bird because they're already a disgrace. Nobody trusts them anymore. So what do you even need them for? I mean, you're just going to follow the Medicare reimbursement schedule is what your treatment's going to be, right? And nobody trusts lawyers anymore because we work in a maritime law system. So if you're in a maritime law system, it's paint by numbers. You don't need judges. You don't need a judge, and you don't need lawyers. You just follow the stupid coding book. So the court system is a complete disgrace. Our medical hospitals are a complete disgrace. The nursing profession is a complete disgrace. The doctors are a complete disgrace. So they're all going to be replaced by artificial self-help Medicare systems, which you'll be able to do on your own computer screen. And that's what's going to happen to the Wall Street traders, because if we go to a social digital centralized obedience participation score, you don't need bond traders. They're going to tank the dollar. You won't need FTX. You won't need Bitcoin. You won't need a bank account. You're just going to have your obedience score. And you can watch reruns of The Wizard of Oz. That's my point today, people. So I'm going to give a thumbs up to Ronald Reagan for telling it like it was back in 1960, 1959, 1960, 61. And, but anyway, Medicare became legit in 1964 after the assassination of John Kennedy, and we're stuck with Medicare. It's socialized, engineered medicine for all. Anyway, that's my murder, mayhem, and mendacity. Hope you enjoyed the show. Please hit the like and subscribe. Have a beautiful rest of your day.